All right. Well, for the sake of time, we'll get started here, and then there will be some time at the end to ask questions, provide feedback, all those sorts of things. But we have a little bit of a program, about 20 minutes worth of a program to cover a couple of different things. So I'm going to go ahead and kick that off. Thank you all so much for hopping on today to learn a little bit more about tnAchieves' impact in Cocke County. We have been working there since 2015, and it's one of the places that I feel really passionate about. I've spent a lot of time in Cocke County hosting meetings with students, training mentors. So while my family's not originally from there, I am from Upper East Tennessee, so I have a special calling to serve the students of your community. So very excited to talk about the work today. We have hosted 82 of these meetings this week. We are on our final day of those with just 8 more left today to wrap us up. So very much been a busy week, but it's been exciting to talk about the progress of students, but also to bring awareness to some of the challenges that the pandemic has brought on to the higher ed community and college access in Tennessee. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and dig into this conversation. You're going to see that we have really kind of 3 sections of content. We're going to start off talking about just an overview of tnAchieves, the work that we do, and some of the services that we provide in your community. We'll talk very specifically about Cocke County right in the middle, talking about some data. And then we'll talk about some ways that you guys as community members can plug into our work, whether that's continuing to serve as a mentor or taking that a step further and looking at some of the other action items that we have kind of prepared. So if you look at your screen now, you'll see just kind of a brief description of tnAchieves. We're a nonprofit based out of Knoxville, and we administer the Tennessee Promise Scholarship. We started way back in 2008 with the class of 2009 as a workforce development initiative. And I would argue today, 12 years later, that's still at the root of what we do. We're trying to connect students with post-secondary opportunities so that they can fill the growing economy of Tennessee. My name's Ben Sterling. I serve as the Senior Director of Content here at tnAchieves, and I've been on staff since June 2014. So as long as we've been in Cocke County, I've been working with tnAchieves. I was actually a student in this program back when it launched in 2009. So I'm one of those 440,000 students that have been served by the program. I was also a volunteer. So I'm part of that 71,000 volunteers recruited as well. So our program has grown since we launched in 2008 for the last 12 years pretty steadily. And so today, I'm going to bounce over to this slide. So today we're serving 90 counties across the state of Tennessee. 74 of those are considered rural Tennessee counties, Cocke County being one of those. And then 35 of those 74 counties are considered at risk or distressed economically by the Department of Community and Economic Development. In those 35 counties, I think our work is probably as pertinent as it could be anywhere in the state. In those 90 counties that we serve, we're working with over 600 high schools. That's public high schools, charter schools, private schools, home schools, everybody. And then at the bottom of this table here, you'll see how many colleges we're working with, 67. That includes all 13 Tennessee community colleges, so Walter State being the community college service in Cocke County, all 27 Tennessee colleges of applied technology, TCAT Morristown, again, serving Cocke County. And then there's a variety of 4-year private and public institutions that fall under the Tennessee Promise umbrella. It probably comes as no surprise for those of you that have been around for a while that most of our students are enrolling at a community college. I think those colleges tend to fill a couple of different roles for students, so in terms of students are going to a community college to earn an associate's degree and then enter the workforce. That option is available to them. But there's also the option for students to go to a community college, get some of their credit hours, and then transfer to a 4-year institution to earn their bachelor's degree. 75% of our students say that's their plan. So when you see this number, it comes as no surprise. I would also say that this TCAT number, 11% of students enrolling at a TCAT, that number's grown pretty steadily over the last 7 years since we launched Tennessee Promise. It was 8% to start. So we're moving in the right direction there. I tend to be pretty passionate about TCATs because I think that's the future of our workforce in Tennessee in terms of manufacturing. So I want to see that number continue to grow. Let's talk about that reach a little bit more. In the 90 counties that we're serving, we work with nearly a little more than 60,000 students every year. That equates to 89% of Tennessee's high school seniors. I think that number it's easy to say, but it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. But nearly 90% of Tennessee's seniors get an email from tnAchieves every year, which is kind of crazy. 78% of all first-time freshmen at community colleges are our students, and then 86% of all graduates at Tennessee community colleges are our students. So we're seeing students from high school all the way through the time that they finish at those community colleges, which is definitely exciting for us. You look in the middle of this slide, you'll see some just general demographic information. This is not unique to Cocke County. This is a statewide perspective, but 56% of our students are eligible for federal financial aid. Essentially, this is determined by students' parents' income. So if they fall below a certain income threshold, they're eligible for that federal financial aid, which is good because that means that they're getting a bunch of money to help them go to college. In the middle of your screen, you'll see that 40% of our students tell us that they're first-generation college students. This is a self-reported metric, and if you know a first-generation college student, it's oftentimes hard to get them to define that. The definition for first generation kind of varies from person to person to person. It's a badge of honor that I wear, but I think for a lot of students, they don't realize that they are a first generation college student when they are. So when it's self-reported, I think this number is actually a little bit higher. A lot of students hear that their aunt or their uncle went to college or their cousin went to college, and that makes them no longer a first gen student. But I disagree. I think if it's just your parents and your siblings, that's what you look at. And then the right-hand side of your screen, talking a little bit more about those STEM-related fields, technical training fields. 51% of our students are majoring in a STEM-related field. This includes all students enrolled at TCATs, any student that's studying a healthcare type of program, or any science, technology, engineering, mathematics major. So for me, I like to see this because, again, as we look at the growth in Tennessee, economic growth, it's all in that manufacturing sector, healthcare sector, engineering, especially in East Tennessee when you've got such a hub for engineering and manufacturing and Oak Ridge and Knoxville and Chattanooga. So it's continuing to grow. It's making its way up I-81, if you will, up through the northeast artery of the state. And we're seeing so much manufacturing in that area that I would love to see more students. The 51% is good. I'd like to see it continue to grow. We had a lunch a couple of weeks ago in Chattanooga with State Senator Bo Watson, who's a physician by trade. And we had a group of students at the table, and he was telling them that if you took a map of the United States, put it on the wall, and threw a dart at it, and you hit some type of city, there's a healthcare job waiting for you in that city. Doesn't matter where. He's like, I want you to stay in Tennessee, but I'm just telling you, if you study healthcare, it's 100% you're going to find a job. So I'm trying to have that conversation with students. So if you're a mentor and you have a student who's unsure about what they want to do, at least tell them about this opportunity, because it just seems like a no-brainer in a lot of ways that if you're looking for sustainable, family providing type of income, healthcare is where it's at. The bottom of this page, you'll see just some basic costs when it comes to our scholarship. Tennessee Promise Scholarship, this is from the state lottery, $32 million annual cost. This comes out to be about $1,000 per award for students. The right-hand side of that, $2.5 million is tnAchieves operating budget. This is for things like staff salaries, facilities, technology, travel, anything that's really just not scholarship dollars. Let's go back and talk a little bit about some of the programs that tnAchieves offers. Obviously, Tennessee Promise is at the heart of our work. I would argue it's the backbone of what we do. Without Tennessee Promise, we don't have 60,000 students every year to work with. So that free or scholarship that allows you to go to college, tuition and mandatory free, is obviously a carrot for students. And when they hear that they can go to college for free, it's attractive. So they apply. Once they apply to a Tennessee Promise, we get their information, and then we begin our sort of wraparound services approach with all of our different programs. The first program that most students will encounter would be our volunteer mentor program. We'll spend some more time talking about that at the end of this program, but volunteer mentor program to me is as vital as any part of our work. To me, it's the kind of the glue that holds all of it together. In a community like Cocke County, where I've been working for so many years, I've seen our mentor program just become so sustainable, and the awareness of Tennessee Promise in general in the community has just continued to grow because of the people that serve as mentors in the community. Cocke County is an example that I always use of a place that's continued to grow in terms of how much awareness there is for the Tennessee Promise Scholarship and the work that we do. The community service aspect to our work is incredibly important as well. Students have to submit complete and submit 8 hours of community service every semester. This is just important to me because I think so many of our students finish their college program with this kind of community mindset. The mandatory community service to me is connecting students with needs in their community that they wouldn't otherwise see. And I think even if it's required or forced on them to use Tennessee Promise, to me, it's still valuable because they're being made aware of community needs. Our summer programs are continuing to grow. This year, we had 3 summer programs for the first time. We had our traditional in-person summer bridge program. We had an online version of that, which I think was really valuable to students who are in parts of the state that make it challenging to get to one of our in-person programs. So it was really, really successful for those students. And then we had our Summer Institute, which is hosted in Memphis, which is kind of like our 3-week summer bridge program, but times 10. It's a 6-week program that's actually credit bearing. So students that participate in Summer Institute start college 9 credit hours ahead. And they also eliminate the need for remediation. This year, that Summer Institute in Memphis had 29 students, and it was 100% successful. So every student that participated started college significantly ahead of their peers. And the best news of that is those were the students that were academically at risk beforehand. So they went from being at risk to ahead in just a matter of 6 weeks. And this is a program that we would love to scale in other places, other parts of the state. Complete is our coaching model. We launched this with the class of 2019, and it's aimed at students from low-income backgrounds. So through the analysis of student progress, we realized that parent income, family income tends to be the greatest indicator of a student's success in college. Students from a lower income background are at a much higher risk of dropping out than their peers. So we launched this program where we hire staff who work with students, a cohort of students, the entire time that those students are in college. So they start working with them now as the students start college in the fall, and then they see them all the way through completion. So it's the reason we call it Complete. And so these coaches are communicating with their assigned students based on community college service area every month, and they have a certain percentage of students that they need to reach every month. And through that, they are building a relationship with students. And in my eyes, building an extra layer of accountability for students when they hit a hard point or a challenge. They have somebody that they can turn to who can help walk them through that process. And so Complete, something that we have seen some really nice success from, but as we'll talk about in just a little bit, we found a new way to innovate in that space. And it's really exciting and actually launched this week. But let's talk some data real quick. So on your screen now, you'll see FAFSA file rate and community service. These are 2 Tennessee Promise requirements. We track everything pretty much that we can track, and that includes Tennessee Promise requirements. And we like to benchmark counties versus the state. So you can see here how Cocke County stacks up against the state in terms of FAFSA file rate, right there at state average. To me, this is a huge win. We saw some counties that had a dip in their data this year. This is from the class of 2021. So obviously during a pandemic year, it was challenging to file FAFSAs. I'm not going to lie. I spent time filing FAFSAs with students this year on Zoom. It's not an easy thing to do. So to see that Cocke County was able to stay right there at the state average is a huge win. I would go to the high school and find a school counselor and pat them on the back and say congratulations, because it was a really good job to keep that number there. Community service wise, students have completed over 17,000 hours of community service. I take this as a time to plug the fact that if you have a community organization that needs volunteers, let us know and we can advertise your volunteer opportunities to Tennessee Promise students. You just send it to me in an email and we'll get it out to them in a variety of ways, whether that's on our website, social media, or just through direct email. We can get that news out about community events and those sorts of things. So like if you have a fall festival or something around Thanksgiving where you need volunteers, let us know, because there's a December 1st deadline. Continuing to talk about data, look at Cocke County, how we stack up against the state in terms of student progress. If you look at these lines, I'm going to kind of lay this out for you, so stay with me. The first line here, Tennessee Promise applicants, this is from the class of 2021, so those students that just graduated high school. The 2 middle rows, the enrolled number and the first year retention, that's from the class of 2019, so you got to go back 2 years to get that data.
It's only supposed to be like 30 minutes.
And then you've got the 3-year graduation rate, and this is from the class of 2017. So as I've laid that out, you can see 308 Tennessee Promise applicants. This is from both high schools, and then any homeschooled, private schooled students in the community. And then in terms of enrollment, you're going to see a pretty high uptake in terms of the percentage of students that apply that actually enroll with Tennessee Promise. I like to see that number being somewhere around above 40%. I think that's about where we are here. And then you've got first year retention rate, 65% versus the state average at 67. And to have a county like Cocke County where there's not a campus in the town, I think this is impressive to see the retention rate at the state average. That means that the students in Cocke County have to leave the county to go to class every day. So that to me is impressive, but even more impressive than that is that there's a 44% completion rate. And that's huge. I think that it's 9 percentage points above the state average. And again, in a county where for students to finish their associate's degree, they're either driving to Morristown or Sevierville to take their classes. And so hats off to the students of Cocke County who are taking the time and putting the miles on their cars to go do that, right? And I think it's impressive. So really good news here. I think it's something that everyone should be proud of in my eyes.
And Ben, I might say also that we now have a Walter State campus here in our county. So we're
Really?
very excited about that. Yes. So
When did that open?
This year.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
yeah, spring semester was there first, and they just had like 3 or 4 classes. And then this semester they're loaded up. They had to add an English comp class.
No
Yeah.
way.
Yes.
Where is it?
It's
Right
downtown
here.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Incredible. I didn't know that. That's great. Are there also TCAT classes at that campus, or is it just Walter State?
Just Walter
You wanna
State.
jump in, Sherry? Yeah. TCAT is still doing a lot of their nursing things at Cocke County High School.
Okay.
But yeah,
What's the
we're
campus
looking
called?
for them too.
Is there a name for it?
They just call it the Newport Center.
Newport Center. All right. Well,
Mhm.
that's great. Is it in town?
It is, we're right beside of the Newport Community Center and the historic Tanner School.
Okay.
And that's why I'm here, because we share, the Cocke County Partnership shares a space with
Okay.
Walter State. And then the Cocke County Senior Center is on the first floor.
Okay. Well, that is great news. So very, very much. I love to see progress in that space as opposed to seeing campuses closed. I love to see campuses open. That's fantastic. Good on Walter State in my eyes. All right, so let's just zoom out just a bit. You'll see how our students stack up against their peers across the state. Tennessee Achieves students in general outpace their peers in fall-to-fall retention by 14 percentage points and by 16 percentage points in 6-year graduation. And what this says to me is that supports matter. Wraparound supports are important. And if you look on the side of your screen, you'll see how some of our programs are impacting fall-to-fall retention. So students that participate in our summer programs are 34% more likely to retain. Coach students through complete are 23% more likely to retain. And then Knox Promise participants are 42% more likely to retain than their peers. Knox Promise, we haven't talked about that, but it's just like Complete, where they have that assigned Tennessee Achieves coach that's on staff, but it's been paired with what we call completion grant funding for the last couple of years. Completion grants are in kind of the buzzword in this industry is emergency funding. But we don't like that word. We like to call it completion grants. So it's funding that's available to students where if they run into some sort of hardship, financial hardship, Tennessee Achieves can alleviate that problem for them. If that is gas, if it's an auto repair, if it's childcare, if it's housing, if it's they need food, we can cover the cost for all of those different types of things through the generosity of Mr. Haslam here in Knoxville. The good news, though, is that this week we announced statewide completion grants with some funding that we were able to acquire from the General Assembly and the General Assembly's budget. So we have some funding that we're dispersing at the moment to students all across the state who have requested that funding from us. The requirements for that funding is that a student must have a 0 EFC, which is the zero estimated family contribution based on their FAFSA. And then there's a cap on how much funding they can receive per semester. And the students that are eligible for that have been made aware of that funding through email from Tennessee Achieves. So we targeted them with communication to announce this really exciting program. And we've had quite the response already, which is great. But for us, it's like it's kind of a double-edged sword because it's heartbreaking because you hear all of these stories from students that you just don't quite realize the circumstances that students face every year. But it's also, I think, even more so inspiring because you see those circumstances and the challenges that students are facing, but still they want to go to college, they want better, and they're willing to ask for help to get there. And to me, that just speaks so much about the students that request this funding. And for us, it helps us tell a better story, right? It paints a better picture for us of what our students are facing so that we can continue to innovate. And as we continue to collect these circumstances and stories from students, it allows us to build a better overall picture of what this completion grant model is going to do for the state and help garner support for the future so that we can continue to offer this into the future. So for the students of Cocke County, if they have financial need, we have additional funding to help alleviate some of those costs, which is super exciting. So in terms of the way that the pandemic has affected higher ed in Tennessee, to kind of put it bluntly, it erased all the progress we made with the class of 2015. If you go all the way back to the class of 2015, when Tennessee Promise launched statewide, we saw a surge in college going in Tennessee, 4.6% increase, huge. But in 1 year, we're all the way back to where we started. And so that is awfully concerning. Hopefully it's just an anecdote on the chart when we look back on this 5 years from now, but we certainly don't want it to continue a trend. So it's an all hands on deck situation, in my opinion, across the state, in particular in Cocke County, where we had nearly a 9 percentage point drop all the way down to 40%. It is concerning, but at the same time, to your point, we just opened a campus there. That can't hurt. To have something local where students know they don't have to drive. I think Cocke County's college going rate has always been a bit below the state average because of that, because you have this thought in your mind. I've been there so much. I've spent at least 2 meetings with students and 1 meeting with mentors every year for the last 7 years in the community. And every time I'm there, there's this concern about driving to campus, right? This transportation challenge. So that does impact college going in the community, no doubt. But to hear that there's a campus opening up, huge, because I think it will impact this in the right direction. So in terms of mentoring, I know all of you guys are mentors or have been mentors. So what I'm going to do is just lay out for you what mentoring in 2022 is going to look like. For many of you, you've served for many years, and you remember those meetings back in 2019 and before that, where we would come together in the high school, sit you down with your students in person, where you had this opportunity to sort of establish a precedent before you got into the kind of virtual communication space that we've always had. But then in 2020, we had 1 week of meetings, and then all of that stopped, and we flipped the mentor program on its head and tried to do something virtual with virtually no technology, which was hard. In 2021, we launched tnAchieves Connect, which revolutionized mentoring with tnAchieves, in my opinion. It was an undertaking, to say the least, but I think we've provided a resource that makes mentoring virtually possible where it wasn't before. And so in 2022, we're going to continue with tnAchieves Connect. Absolutely. We're not going to do away with that. We're going to make it better and continue to find ways to make it easier for mentors to use that. So if you've had a hard time with it this year, we're going to make it better and easier for you. So stay with us on that. But we're also going to provide, hopefully, fingers crossed, opportunities for mentors and students to meet face-to-face. And this is going to be a little different than it has been in the past. So there's going to be 2 ways that you can meet with your students in person. The first one of those, easy as pie. You just meet with them independently. You find a place in the community, whether that's at the high school, at a campus, at a coffee shop. You guys come together and just meet independently on your own time. As long as it's in a public place, we're fine with that. Or you can meet at what we're going to call tnAchieves Open House. We're going to host one of these in every county that we serve, which is essentially tnAchieves will coordinate with a college campus or a high school to reserve a room, some space on a particular day this spring. So let's just use March 23rd as an example. So on March 23rd, tnAchieves will reserve space, and from 2 to 6 p.m., our team will be there present, and you can invite your students to meet you at that location to have a meetup and get to know one another. We're not inviting the entire community to this. It's going to be on the mentor to invite their students to meet them at this event, at this date, but we're going to provide the space essentially for you to have that meeting. And I think for some mentors, this will take the guesswork out of trying to figure out where and when to do it. It makes it really easy to nail down a date. But for those that are more flexible and are willing to make their own time, do it on their own time, by all means, do it that way. So we're gonna have those 2 in-person options for those that want that in-person interaction. And if that's not what you want, there's still gonna be the opportunity to mentor 100% virtually in 2022. So trying to meet everybody where they are. We're calling it hybrid mentoring this year. And I think it'll be a nice way to meet every mentor with what their particular interests are. Fingers crossed that we can do the in-person meetings, right? In general, we need 47 mentors in Cocke County. We have one of the highest retention rates in the state there. Again, we have sort of a loyal base of mentors, 20, 25 people that come back every year, have been doing it for 3 or 4 years, which I think you can tell as you look at just kind of the way the community has embraced our work, which is awesome. But we still need to find new people every year. So if you have a friend that you haven't told about mentoring, please do so. They can apply at tnAchieves.org/mentors. The deadline to apply is December 3rd. So we still have some time on that, which sort of leads me to my next way that you can engage with our work, which is connecting us with your community. So if you're a member of a community organization, if you're a member of a church group, anything where you have a group of folks that are coming together to learn about the community, we can come and provide a program. We need a minimum of 3 minutes, a maximum of an hour and a half. We can fill any type of space that you have in terms of a program and talking about our work. We would appreciate it if you have a way to connect us in that way. We can do it virtually. We can do it in person. You just tell us and I'll be there. I'm always happy to drive up for you and visit. And then the last way that you can really impact our work and be involved in this is to tell somebody about Tennessee Promise. I think this seems silly, as many as when you look across the state, nearly everybody applies. But every year there's that one student that should have applied and they forgot. And I don't want that to happen to a student that you know. And the example I always give is my brother, who did not apply for Tennessee Achieves. I have been involved with this program since it launched and its inception. I got him 2 deadline extensions for his application back in 2012, and he still didn't do it because it's just how he is. And so I had a paper application laid on the kitchen table, and he ignored it. So when you think that a student has it all together and that they've done everything that they're supposed to do, you might be surprised to find out that they forgot to do something. So I would just say, if you know a parent of a senior, just tell them that the deadline's November 1st. The application is open right now. They apply at tnpromise.gov. It takes 5 minutes. Such an easy thing. Would hate for someone to forget. All right. That's what I have in terms of a program. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because you guys probably have my contact information. And you can feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions, provide feedback. Let me know your thoughts on the data. Certainly happy to have any sort of dialogue with you guys.
Ben?
Yes, sir.
I have a question or two. First, will those sort of local meetings that you mentioned that are going to be new, will that replace the big gatherings that we had before?
Good. It's a great question. Yes. For the spring, that replaces the gathering. Our hope, again, another fingers crossed situation, is that from November to February, Tennessee Achieves will visit every high school in the state and provide an assembly that will replace that mandatory meeting. So we'll go into the high schools, ideally, like a guy like me would do 4 in a day. We would hit 4 high schools in one day where we go in, provide a 25-minute program, and we're going to hand out pieces of paper that are like the size of my handbook, and it'll have a QR code on it. The student scans that with their phone, signs in, that marks their attendance at their mandatory meeting. Next step is they activate their Connect profile, all while we're there. And then once they do that, it goes into our system. We know who's eligible. They complete their FAFSA by February 1st. And then we know when we pair them with you in February or early March, they've filed FAFSA, they've attended their mandatory meeting, and they've set up their Connect profile. All really important steps. So we're hoping to be able to accomplish that this winter. Right now, it's shaky at best to look at the data and see how things are shaking out. But we have fingers crossed that those things are going to happen and that we're going to level off here across the state.
Okay. My other question, and then I have a comment. My other question is about the statistics. I think you gave part of it, but if we look at if we start with 100% being the graduating seniors, and then we go to those who sort of start the program, and then those who complete the requirements, community service. Well, I think you gave us that for applying for financial aid.
Right.
But when we go down the line, what's the pattern of attrition as you go
Sure.
from one stage to the other?
Yeah. So you're just asking kind of why there's attrition and where they're going
Well, and I was just wondering how much attrition
percentage wise.
between, in other words, how significant is each requirement in terms of attrition?
Okay, great question. It's going to differ county to county big time. Obviously, there's no real consistency across the board. Each place has its own data for sure. But what we find is that in general, you've got, so let's say you have 60,000 students apply for Tennessee Promise. In the state of Tennessee, about 45,000 students go to college. Not that many go with Tennessee Promise, obviously. We have about 18,000 that enroll with Tennessee Promise. So naturally, there is attrition. There's not one single deadline or step along the way that's the significant barrier that stops people from going to college. But what I think you find is that you have students that along the way, along their journey, realize that this isn't what they wanted to do. They applied for Tennessee Promise because there's this push across the state to get 100% application, right? But then you have the student with the full ride to Vanderbilt that's applied for Tennessee Promise that's never going to go to a Tennessee Promise eligible institution. So they don't come to their meeting. They're ineligible. So then there's a mark there in terms of attrition. If there's one spot one spot on the timeline that tends to have the largest drop, it's that community service deadline. But I don't think it's because it's hard to do community service. I think it's just because it's the last deadline before you start college. So you have all these students that sort of retain Tennessee Promise eligibility all the way up to that point. And then they're like, okay, well, I'm going to go to UT, so I'm not going to do the community service.
Yeah. And just to comment in that regard, and this is directed to Sherry as well as all of us. I wonder if we could have a program in the high schools where they do their community service while they're still in high school under supervision, instead of, having it after graduation when it gets more uncertain.
Yeah, I would say from my kind of anecdotally, but looking at the students that I've talked to and worked with, most of the hours submitted for that July 1st deadline are things that they've done while they were in high school. So anything that's done after November 2nd, the deadline for Tennessee Promise application. So anything done after November 2nd through July 1st can count towards that deadline. So if a student volunteers at a basketball game to serve concessions, or if they, help plant trees on campus, whatever it is, often you would be surprised to see how many students actually do it at the high school. It's most for that first deadline. Now looking beyond that towards the December 1st deadline, and then things once they're in college, they really start having to get creative and find things in their community. But that first one across the state, I'd say over half of students that submit community service, they're doing it at their school. Yeah, but to your point, it's wise to do a coordinated effort. There's certainly no hurt in that.
Yeah. I think if they did it at school or right after school under supervision, we'd pick up some folks who drop out after graduation because of this requirement. And while I'm hogging the conversation, I'll make my general comment. I've, over the last few years, and this really is a pattern that is not just a pandemic matter, but I've had a very low rate of response from students when I contact them. And a year ago, I finally got a cell phone where I could text. So, I've been texting as well as emailing, and I just don't know whether they're getting my information and doing whatever they would do with it or not, because I'm not getting individual responses from students. And sometimes I'll ask a question, not that it's anything individual, but just a general question about what's going on. But it's a concern to me because I don't really know how much what I'm doing is better than you just doing it from your office.
Yeah, that's a great concern. I certainly understand that. With every one of these calls I've had has had a mentor that feels the same way that you do. So I think part of that is just a consequence of being so virtual and not being able to engage with those students in person. It does make it harder, 1000%. I think there's a bit of virtual fatigue for students across the state. I know that I talked to Marlon Kernut, who is he works at the Claiborne County campus of Walter State, on our call this past week. And he said when he was advised, he advises a lot of students and signs them up for classes. And he said when he talked to current college students that are in college, so from the class of 2020, they're like, yeah, sure, let's do a hybrid approach. Let's do some online classes and some in-person classes. Students from the class of 2021 that just graduated high school were like, if you put me in an online class, I quit. Before he even started, he's like, if you put me in an online class, I'm not coming. And so that to me says a lot about why I think mentors have had a hard time engaging with students, because they're just like, they don't even know where to really turn. It's not our fault. It's not your fault. It's not their fault. It's just really weird. It's just an odd time. So I think as we move into 2022, we now know that. We can recognize that. We can kind of combat it in a way by getting them on Connect. I think getting them on Connect early, setting that precedent, will help you as a mentor, because if they're in Connect, their cell phone number's in Connect and their email's in there, when you message them through Connect, they're going to be harassed by Connect to reply back to you. Okay. So they get text messages from Connect that says, Isaac has messaged you, reply. And they will get a reminder of that until they do it. So that to me is going to be huge. If we can get every student that comes to one of those assemblies in Connect, it's going to solve a lot of this, because they're going to be harassed to reply. If they don't, then we'll just keep harassing them.
Yeah, and one other comment, I think this sort of new idea of having individual on-campus meetings or community, meetings with our individual groups is a really good idea, because then folks like Sherry Weeks can facilitate the follow-up and reminding them. And I think that would help a lot, because not having seen them face to face just makes it more difficult to communicate electronically.
Agreed. And there's something to be said for, I think the more rural counties have definitely had a harder time, because there are students in Cocke County that have very little access to high-speed internet and those types of things. So students that live in town probably have no problem, but I know from my experience being in the county, I lose phone service as soon as I get out of Newport. So that can be a challenge for students too. So and I just think in general, there's this more places that are just a tighter knit community want to meet in person. That's anecdotal as well, but it feels that way to me. So I could see how it would be beneficial to you to want to engage with your students in person. Makes sense to me, no doubt.
Yeah, I would like to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Of course. Thanks for hopping on.
I'm like the flip side to that. I love the virtual.
Yeah. Then that's what we found, is that half of our mentors went in person. Half of our mentors were like, Connect's the best thing that's ever happened. So.
And hey, Ben, what we're seeing now, and we don't know what 3 or 4 months down the road holds for us as far as meeting, but we're seeing some attendance issues and with people quarantined. So and we're also seeing, some students are going to a homeschool program, and then we have some that are jumping in. So it's kind of like they're jumping in, jumping out at different points in the process this year. So I'm concerned about attendance in November. That's when our mandatory meeting is, but time will tell.
Sure. Yeah, we're in a holding pattern for sure.
Yes. Yeah. One other thing too, and this has not came up yet, but it possibly could. If we have a student who has applied for Tennessee Promise and they were currently in a homeschool environment, and then they transfer to a high school, let's say in December, will that affect anything? Do we need to do anything on our end to notify you of the change in venue for the school?
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, if you have that case, if you could let us know, just email me or Amy on our team, somebody, whoever you've worked with, but I'm happy to be that point of contact for you. Just let me know. Really, all I need is name, date of birth, and where they are now, where they were before and where they are now. That helps us. And then we can make that update on our end, and then we can notify TSAC, who will update it on their end. So that we can have it correct across the board. The reason that's important is, in terms of tracking a variety of things for us. I mean, in terms of looking at my work, I do a lot of things kind of like this. That's more of a community-based look. So that person I'd want included in Cocke County's numbers as opposed to Cocke County private homeschools number. right? If they're going to school there, that's what I want, but also in terms of like attendance and those types of things.
Okay, and vice versa, we may have a student who's applied here and
Mhm.
may flip to homeschool, so.
If that happens, if you could just let us know. I know that's sort of a hard thing to wrangle, so we understand if you have a hard time with it. It's not going to make or break them by any
Okay.
means,
Okay.
but we would definitely, it makes if you don't change it with us now, there's a chance when we do if we end up doing these in-person meetings, they might get like an email that's like, you didn't attend your meeting, and then they were homeschooled, so
Right.
they weren't going to be there. And for those students, we're going to have that virtual option that we did last year, watching it on Connect. So that's going to still be the case for all private and homeschooled students in the state. And then for any county where we can't have that in-person meeting, we will communicate that to the students and to you, and then to the students in terms of how they can watch that on the webinar. So there will be a webinar option, definitely. Hopefully it's used sparingly, but at this point, it seems like it's going to maybe be the primary way of doing it.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Good question.
I just want to say kudos on the Connect platform. I love it.
Thanks.
I'm a Tennessee Reconnect navigator.
Okay.
So I wish we had a Connect platform for the reconnectors. That would be outstanding.
Yeah.
Because we spend a lot of time trying to connect with them and everything. So with that, I have a question.
Mhm.
Some of my mentees took a long time to activate Connect.
Mhm.
I love what you're doing about the QR code and everything this year, but is there any way to link it with the TSAC portal? Either before they enter the portal to do the promise or after they do the promise application, to somehow like, this is your next final step?
Great question. That's
Just a suggestion.
It's hard for us to do it that way, because so this is a little technical, but the way that it works for us is we get the student's information from TSAC. That includes social, right? We import all of that into Connect, and we create each student's account for them. And then we send them this link that's unique, that is so your link, Karen, would be, when you click this link, it takes you to Connect, and it automatically puts you in your profile in Connect, so that all you have to do is click next, 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 and you're done. And so then you're in, it's got your information in there, and then you can make the edits as you see. Instead of it being like a sign up, it's an activation. Right. And we have to do that on our end first. So we couldn't put it like as like the next step in the Tennessee Promise app, because they wouldn't be in Connect yet. For me, that is, to your point, we've talked about that, because man, would that be easy. But aligning all of those forces at B, it's hard, unfortunately.
And then my next question is, they're really invested with their guidance counselors, as they should be. Sherry, are you a guidance counselor? She is.
Yes, I am. I'm a school counselor, and just along those lines, and we see this becoming more and more a obstacle, is students who are at risk, low income. They're not tech savvy. They don't really have anybody to guide them from step to step. Even something as simple as applying at a college and maneuvering through all the passwords, and the FAFSA and all that. It's just, it's really, they really struggle. So we here at the high school, and both high schools here in our county, we really work with them, but it is, we can use all the help that we can get in educating within that fact, because not only that's part of our job, of course, but crisis and COVID is just, it's made our job so hard. We're multitasking and working 12 hours a day and over the weekend, even just to do our basic job. So we need all the help we can get.
Well, what I was wondering was, is there any way that the names of the mentors for the students could go back to the high school guidance counselors so that if Lisa asked Sherry, who's this Karen Sarton person who's
Oh,
texting
yeah.
me,
Yeah,
then they could validate she's your mentor.
that would be
She'll
great.
work with you.
Yes, yes.
That
Yes,
kind
that
of
would be
thing.
wonderful. Yes. And in the past, we've not known that information, and sometimes students will ask us,
Yeah.
and we don't know ourselves. So yes, that would be so beneficial.
Yeah, we'll have to think
I just
through
feel
that.
like it would help build that trust, and especially when you're just in a virtual world and
Mhm.
they've
Oh, yeah.
not came to that initial meeting and the parents aren't with them. And, sometimes the parents are like, well, I don't know who that is either, so just don't answer it.
Yeah, that happens.
Yes.
Especially in Appalachia, where people
Yeah.
are already skeptical.
Well, I
And-
started out texting the parents and and then calling them, and only had 2 that actually responded.
That's
But of those 2, their Tennessee Promise students didn't matriculate through.
mhm.
Right. And sometimes in our area, especially for Cosby High School, they don't have a good cell phone signal at home. The only time they can communicate is here on our school Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So, that can be an issue.
For sure. Yeah, it makes it hard when you've got a program like ours right now that's so virtual. That's challenging.
And Sherry, I would be happy to help anyone. My background's in higher ed. I used to be a financial aid director, executive director of enrollment management. Now I'm a Reconnect navigator, and that's what I do every day. I just have focused more on adults with how do you get reconnected back to school? And they have the same issues
Mhm.
that the new high school students have. How do I apply? How do I get started? How do I do my FAFSA? Why are they emailing me just through my senator's email? Or what's the My Walter State? What's
Right.
this Brightspace thing? It's the
Yes.
learning platform, and it just
Yes.
keeps going.
Keeps going, yes. But thank you so much for the offer.
Yeah, and I'll have to think through that. The mentors to the counselor. In some cases, in like this case where I know Sherry well, and I know that she would use that data for the right reasons, that sounds like a great opportunity. But if across the state you run into this situation where like, oh, you haven't heard from your mentor, well, then let me just reach out to them, And in that case, then it becomes a little more conflicted. So we've always been a little hesitant to share that information out, because in the case where like a mentor, like my wife, for example, who's a mentor and doesn't always do the best job of being active and proactive, she might get like a counselor might reach out to her and be like, well, why aren't you communicating with my students? So you have to kind of think about it from that end too.
Maybe it's left up to the mentor to opt in.
Yeah, no, that's not a bad idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. I think there's a ton of good in that, in the counselor, especially in a tight knit community like Cosby or in Newport, where most of the time everybody knows each other, and in that case, it's a little more. I think there's benefit to it there. So, or maybe there's not.
I think if you have boundaries and you can at least give them that information.
Yeah, we do send that to the student. So the student does get an email from us that says your mentor is Isaac Lassiter, and here's his email address. So we do, and we send that to the parents. So they do get that. It's not just the mentor who gets the student's information. That used to be the case. We changed it to where the student does get the mentor's info now. And now in Connect, if they just log into Connect, they can see the mentor's profile and learn even more about them. So we're getting better in that space. But as I'm sitting here talking about this, I'm thinking, well, what if Sherry was the mentor, the counselor that wanted to call the mentor out for not mentoring and saw him at church? And I was just like,
I would never do that.
no. I'm just kidding. But, oh man, I know you wouldn't, but I just think about it across the state. What if we sent out 9,000 people's information like that?
It could happen. Yeah.
Well, guys, I really appreciate y'all for hopping on. I've got another one of these in 5 minutes. Got to get started in 5 minutes. Marion County, Tennessee. So certainly appreciate you guys for hopping on. I'm always happy to visit Newport and Cocke County. If you guys need anything, Cosby too. Don't let me forget Cosby too. I'm always happy to come up and visit and provide any information that you need. And certainly appreciate y'all for continuing to serve as mentors. I can't wait to see the Walter State campus. I'm coming to see it next time I'm there.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I guess.
Bye.